Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Surefire M600 Scout Dual Fuel. It can be said that in some categories of firearms, accessories, and even firearms, innovation is kind of stagnated. But one of the areas where that's definitely not true is in the category of handheld lights and weapon-mounted lights. And if you're not familiar, the lumen war is on. It's been on for quite some time. Manufacturers continuing to put out brighter and brighter lights, which is a really, really good thing. Lights are still not quite as bright, in my opinion, as I would like to see, especially for the uses on a rifle. But in general, we're trying to create lights that give us the same kind of quality data that we get from a bright sunny day, but with the advantage of the fact that we control that light and we use it when we want, when we don't. So it's nice to see when companies continue to put out brighter lights of higher quality with more focus on, no pun intended, the quality of the beam for the purposes that they're designed for. While it is a race, if some competing company puts out a 1,000 lumen light, it's only a matter of time before their competitors try to do the same. It can be said that those who do it first don't necessarily do it best. And some companies, Surefire being a pretty good example of that, aren't necessarily so interested in being first so long as their product is going to maintain the quality that Surefire is known for. So when it took a while for Surefire to release in some people's opinion, took a while for Surefire to release a latest version of their venerable Scout light, I wasn't necessarily surprised because I'm sure whatever was going to come out was going to continue Surefire's dedication to producing a quality product. What we finally got was the newest generation of the Scout light. On first glance, it appears to be roughly the same footprint as the previous light. However, it is slightly longer, and it does have an increased diameter to account for the fact that the light can run off of CR123s, the standard battery high drain devices are known for using, at least in regards to weapon lights. But it can also run off the 18650 rechargeable, which by far is my favorite feature in any light these days, because high drain devices burn batteries. Not everybody's going to go through a lot of batteries depending on how much you use your handheld light or weapon mounted light. Because I teach low light classes, I do a little low light practice and night vision and other things where white light is going to be used occasionally or periodically throughout the course of a fire. I go through 200-300 batteries a year easily. So having rechargeable devices to me is going to save me quite a bit of money, and everybody's got a budget. Not only that, but because we've moved forward in the technology of lights, you just can't get as much output from a CR123 without going to a 6 volt or a 9 volt or a 12 volt model as you can out of an 18650. The numbers everyone is always interested in when it comes to flashlights is because of how they're marketed. We want to talk about lumens, and while lumens is a metric, it is a very good measurement of a light's performance, it's not the only number that we should be concerned with. The new Surefire Scout DF can put out, when running off 18650s, 1500 lumens at 16,000 candela. If you choose to or have to run it off the 123s, you're going to get 1200 lumens with almost 13,000 candela. If you're not familiar, lumens is a measure of a light's output, whereas candela is a measure of intensity at a point. But those numbers can be somewhat deceiving depending on the design of the beam and the intent of the light. One thing you saw with the previous generation of Scout lights is the fact that the Scout and the X300U shared the exact same head, the exact same beam pattern, which for some reason was a point of contention on the internet, but even Surefire themselves will say no, they were the exact same head. It's just the body was in a different configuration, obviously for the handgun versus the Scout rifle body. You're not seeing that now with the new DF. The head has been redesigned and arguably purpose-built for the purpose of a rifle. And not necessarily it wasn't useful on a rifle in the past. The M600 in the 600 lumen generation was a really venerable, really good light. However, it wasn't able to perform to, and this is my opinion, it wasn't giving me the kind of light that I would want for a rifle platform. When it comes to beam design, Surefire has been known for the TIR lens. It's a good lens, it's a good design. It's going to give me a good amount of spill, if you will, my overall encompassing cornea of light, whereas I'm going to have a focused hotspot, which is what I want, especially for self-defense purpose. On a rifle, I want my light to punch out further so I can get positive identification of targets at a greater distance than what I'd reasonably expect with a handgun. When it comes to candela, that's where you're going to get that hotspot. Now, the size of the hotspot is going to be completely determined on how the lens is designed. I personally prefer a very tight hotspot. When I say a tight hotspot, I mean something roughly at 25 meters the size of a pie plate. I'm going to use that hotspot not only for very specific data as I'm using the light to gather information, but also as a method of control to remove the visual horizon of my bad guys. I want to be able to put it in their eyes and take away their main sensory input to the best of my ability based on the performance of the light. Rifles can reach further. With the continual and increasing popularity of variable magnification optics, it's incredibly important from almost all aspects of shooting when we have self-defense in mind, regardless of occupation, that our weapon lights are able to PID at the distances our optics can see. That's very important. Just because you can see something at 100 meters doesn't mean you can positively identify it. Some lights in the past, I remember back in the day using a 300 lumen legacy light. I believe it was the Surefire Millennial series, and I could actually make out an E-type silhouette at 100 meters, but I couldn't positively identify it. All I could do was see just a general silhouette and a shape. And for my purpose at that time, I'd have no business shooting that shape. Maybe as a military application, you can get away with it, like, hey, that guy's definitely not supposed to be there. We can go ahead and engage him. But for law enforcement self-defense purposes, definitely, we have to have a higher bar in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, a higher bar of positive identification. So any light you put on a weapon should be capable of giving you positive identification at those distances that you'd reasonably expect to have to, or potentially have to, engage at. For those of you that are flashlight aficionados, you're probably paid close attention to those numbers. I'm going to talk just about the high output, the 18650, because that's what I'm going to use. 1500 lumens is a great amount of lumens. It's going to give me a reasonable amount of light, a very good amount of light, compared to what's currently offered from some of the competition lights that are out there. Now, the candela can be a little bit deceiving in the fact that it's speaking to the size of our hotspot. And while there are lights out there that have a higher candela rating at a lower lumen level, that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, because it's a very complicated mathematical balance based on the way that eye perceives light and how things are measured. It's nice to see that Surefire is using the ANSI standards for measurement, so now when we actually look at the numbers, they're using an objective, disinterested party's measurements to be able to determine the maximum output of their light versus using some kind of algorithm or process for measuring light that we might not necessarily know exactly if those numbers are going to be true to form. The ANSI standards are also used by a number of other companies, so we're giving a more objective look at the output of the light. But back to that hotspot. The hotspot on the new DF light is, initially I was like, okay, this is really big. And it is a very large hotspot. But what I found is that hotspot, in conjunction with my total throw output of the light, gave me a very good beam pattern to use at intermediate distances, which is exactly what I want on a rifle. Some rifle lights in the past, and there have been a few people who have tried it, they've had a very tightly focused hotspot, and that's fine because it's going to push that candela downrange a little bit further, but I'm losing some of my ability overall to have the light negate or manage the environment in which it's used. It's unlikely that there's going to be no ambient light present in a situation where you're going to use a weapon light. So anytime I look at the performances of weapon-mounted lights and even handheld lights, I want to see what their ability is to contend with those photonic barriers. Ambient lighting, street lighting, cars, other lighting sources, other present lights, any light that's created in the environment that can steal some of my light away as I'm trying to push downrange or push through a lighting source and positively identify or control what I'm trying to see. With the new DF, first thing I'm going to check is I'm going to see can it deal with backlighting. Backlighting is a very real concern, not only in the aspect of a low light situation where my potential target or my unknown individual or my target is set up in front of a lighting source and it's being silhouetted. I've got to be able to overcome that backlighting and get that positive identification. The DF was definitely capable of pushing through that backlighting and increased distances. Not only in low light conditions, if you find somebody indoors in a dimly lit building and they're skylined against an exterior window or an exterior double doors like you'd see in a lot of commercial or public buildings, The sun is a lot of lumens, and you need to be able to push a lot of lumens and candela downrange to be able to overcome the big orange ball. The Scout DF is definitely capable of contending with that, and that's something that I wasn't able to see in the past generations of weapon lights at extended distances indoors. I'm going to be able to get that confidently and comfortably from Surefire's new Scout light. As far as performance goes, it's everything you'd expect from a Surefire product if you're not already familiar. One thing specifically that I liked a lot is the fact that I have a very high drain device, 1500 lumens. That's pulling a lot of power from that battery, but the thermal regulation seems to be on point. Even with extended run times where the light was on, constant on, for 5-6 minutes at a time, 10-15 minutes at a time, I wasn't getting any beam flickering, any beam dimming, or any other issues that were noticeable to the human eye that was stealing some of my light away from me because the light was getting super hot. And the longer you use it, arguably the hotter it's going to get, which can risk, in some lights, thermal regulation issues where the light actually has to cut down its output in order for it to not catch fire or grenade. Now, Surefire is very specific about their batteries. You have to use a specific type of battery, and there are a lot of 18650s out there. My advice to you, Surefire's advice to you, is only use batteries approved for their products. And there's already been disclaimers put out on the internet about this of people throwing substandard because they just didn't know batteries into their Surefire products, and best case scenario they just didn't work, and worst case scenario the lights were actually becoming permanently damaged or grenading and having little miniature explosions. So that's not a good thing. You want to make sure that you put the proper spec battery in your product at all times. As far as distance performance goes, I really couldn't be any happier with this current generation of lights. In really dark conditions as well as ambient lighting conditions, I was able to push in extended ranges and be able to engage and shoot accurately, which is exactly what I want. Just for the anecdotal sake, I was at 100 meters putting it on steel, no problem whatsoever. Granted, that's a steel target. I know it's there. I know it's able to shoot. It's not quite a PID when compared to an actual threat, no threat judgment type target situation. But even so, at that distance, I was able to clearly see what I was actually aiming at, and I was able to get contrast in the environment between the plate, other objects present, and the background of the target itself. So I wasn't just barely able to make out what I was trying to hit like I maybe was able to do with previous generations of lights. I'm definitely seeing as the years go on that every generation of light is able to get me just a little bit further out, regardless of the ambient lighting conditions that I'm dealing with. So as far as the latest generation of lights is concerned, I'm very happy with Surefire's overall performance. Now, getting into the durability of the light, no issues were experienced. I don't abuse my equipment, but it definitely does get some hard use. Now, I've had this DF model for a couple of months now. I was able to get my hands on one before they were released to the public. I've been using it since then. It's been mounted on the rifle for almost 4,000 rounds at this point, to include some very high volume round counts. The light not only was run for extended periods, I've burnt down multiple batteries at this point using the light, like I said, 5 or 6 minutes constant on at a time, sometimes going even further than that, but just the volume of fire, and it's sitting there right next to not only the barrel as the barrel heats, the light itself is heating for extended use, and it's sitting right next to a cooking hot suppressor. And it continues to do exactly what it's designed to do, which is function, work, and do so without any undue issues like we already kind of talked about. There are no thermal regulation issues that I was able to perceive during extended use of the light. The new Surefire is backwards compatible to the last generation of accessories. So your pressure pads and your dual tape switches, if you're using them in conjunction with a night vision device such as a PEC 15, you're good to go. It's going to work. One thing that I definitely noticed when taking apart the DF is improved connections, especially on the actual head of the light to contend with the two different types of batteries, which there have been some competitors' lights out there that run on dual fuel that have had connectivity issues based on different tolerances between an 18650 versus CR123s. The Streamlight HLX had that problem. Now, the HLX was easy to fix. All I had to do was stretch that rear spring, but if you don't know that and your tail switch gets twisted in just the right way, you lose your light, which is a huge issue, and that's something that Streamlight hopefully fixes in the future. Again, this isn't a comparison, but I can see that Surefire thought ahead about that potentially being a problem, and they increased their overall surface area for battery connectivity to prevent that problem, because it's a weapon-mounted light, so it should not share the same features that you might be able to get away with a handheld light. And that's definitely not something that you're going to have to worry about, at least through my experience thus far, with the Scout DF. Now, because I was aware of that problem with the Streamlight, after a while became aware of it with my own personal experience, I wanted to make sure going forward that the Surefire wasn't going to have that problem. So I purposely did everything I could to try to recreate that potential problem in the Surefire light. I didn't expect it because of the way that Surefire designs their battery connections and how everything works together. But I wanted to make sure, especially going forward putting this video out, that I wasn't going to find out a month or 2 or months from now from my own personal use or from someone else's use that creates a problem or that became a problem. So I'm definitely confident in the fact that that's not going to happen on the DF light. And that's one of the problems with doing a review. You have to pick a point at which to give people your opinion. And I usually use, for almost everything firearms related, a 2,000 round mark to do that. I was able to go even further with this light because I couldn't tell people about it or show people the light existed until it had actually been publicly released. And now that it is, I'm able to put this review out. But the good thing was I was able to take it to nearly twice, just over twice what my normal review period would be before making the video. Final verdict on the new Scout light. Do you need it? I don't know. It depends on what you're doing. I'm not going to say you have to run out and buy it. However, I will say this. If you look for bright quality lights, and especially for the purposes of rifle mounting, you want to be able to increase your potential envelope of positive identification of targets, this is a really good light for that purpose. Not only do I get a great cornea to gather data from the left and the right and not necessarily get sucked into a very tight beam, but I have a very reasonable hotspot that's going to allow me to get that extended distance for control of an unknown suspect. But also PID, because Candela is really what's going to give you PID over just strict 100% lumen horsepower. The Scout DF does that very, very well. It also is the Surefire pattern, so it works with Surefire switches and accessories, which, in my opinion, have been some of the best switches ever made for that purpose. Being able to run my weapon-mounted light off of rechargeable batteries is a huge bonus, and I'm glad that Surefire finally revisited the rechargeable era now that battery technology has improved. That being said, if you don't feel like you need that much lumens, I don't really know what to tell you. My personal feeling is you do. There's still that camp of people who feel like, 300 lumens is just enough. I don't want any more than that because I might blind myself. And my advice to you is take a low light class because it sounds like you haven't had one. But again, this isn't a video about technique. It's a video about the Surefire Scout, so I'll kind of leave that alone. I'm a huge fan. I will be switching back over. If there's going to be an audible gasp about that, I'm not brand loyal. I go where the quality and the output is. And because Surefire is going to give me both of those, I'm very happy that the new Scout Light DF exists. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.